Welcome to Ravinheart Renditions Shop Time, and we're talking with Hendrik Varju again. How you doing, Hendrik?
Great. How are you, Andrew?
Doing good. It's
Good.
the heat has finally broken a little. We have rain. I actually have grass again, which is kind of frightening, but
Yeah, we've had a really hot summer here too. So just got some rain today, and there's fire bans all over the province. You know, when you go camping and stuff, you can't even put a fire on at all anymore.
Well, that's not much of a camping trip. That kind of sucks.
No. I went on 2 camping trips in the last month, and both times just sitting around with a lantern playing cards.
Well, that's
disappointing.
Well, hopefully you get a little more rain, you'll be able to have a nice fire going. I think cooking's a little easier.
Yeah,
fire.
I saved my offcuts for months and months and months just for those camping trips, and couldn't even burn them.
Yeah, I have a small box of the little stuff sitting next to the fridge in the shop here, and it's been sitting there overflowing because I can't get the fire pit out either. We got a ban here too, so.
Oh yeah.
So what's been going on up in the Great White North up there lately for you?
Well, I've been pretty busy. I had a trip down to Texas for a couple of weeks earlier in July, and that was a business trip, so that was time consuming. And then I've been working on some things in my shop, working on some chairs, and I'm also, this time of year, I'm heavily into my trying to get my next DVD production out. So, it's something that takes months and months, but this is the time I'm sort of putting the final product together. I always try to launch it in September, so it's coming up.
Cool. And in September, I think we're going to do a little more talking about that DVD, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I always keep the topic top secret till it's launched, so even some of my best customers are already emailing me, asking me the topic, and I won't tell them. But yeah, I always try to put it out in September, and next show I'll let you know what the topic is. Should be launched by then, and then maybe in a future show we can even talk about the content of it. You can watch it, and we can chat about different questions people might want to send in and that kind of thing.
That sounds great. I look forward to taking a look at it.
Good.
Cool. And I hear you had a trip to Texas, so you have another little trip coming up too, down south of our country here.
Yeah, just another, not even 2 weeks from now. Got the International Woodworking Fair down in Atlanta, which is every second year. So I've been going to I think I've been to the last 4 in a row. So I'm looking forward to that. I know last year or 2 years ago, the show had shrunken a little bit from what it had been the year prior. But there seems to be a lot of hype this year about how more vendors are going in, more people are planning to go. There's a lot of excitement about it, and I think a lot of businesses are trying to, get back on track after a bit of a slowdown there a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went to a scroll saw show that used to be really, really big here in Wisconsin, and 2 years ago it was so bleak, and it's nice to see, the next year it had more, and this year it had more. So I mean, IWF and I think the one out in Vegas, everything kind of shrunk a little bit, and now it's all coming back. So it's good to see it coming back. So
yeah, I mean, they used to have almost an entire building at the IWF filled with massive German machinery, like we're talking factory equipment,
Oh wow.
Which honestly is not that exciting for me to see, because one machine will be a few $1 million and bigger than my shop, and there would be a whole building of that. So you just kind of walk through quickly, but it's not a lot to see that way. But 2 years ago when I was there, most of that German factory kind of stuff was totally gone, which was a bit shocking. But that's why the show was so much smaller, because that stuff takes up so much floor space. But you still have a great selection of, American companies, Canadian companies. You have Lee Nielsen, you got Veritas, Lee Valley. You got all your stuff like Delta and Porter Cable and Bosch, and all those kinds of tool companies are always there. So it's great to see all the tooling, see all the new product releases. I do some writing for Woodworking magazines, so they specifically target the press, send us information in advance, make appointments with us to meet with product managers to see what's new and what's coming out. And it's a really good way to see what's around the corner, what's coming out fresh that nobody knows about.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I had a talk with Bruce Wang from Microjig, and he said, if I remember their post right, they were announcing a new product at IWF, if I remember right. So you might have to go and say hi for me to them when you're down there, if you could.
Yeah, I've heard that that the company was started by his father, and I've never even met the son, but I heard about him recently. So yeah, if they're there, I'll definitely go in and say hello and see what they've got to offer.
Yeah, cool. Well, as far as the conversation that we were talking about, Hendrik and I did some emailing back and forth, and we thought it would be a good idea to go through kind of starting up into woodworking. And I mean, the way I ended up starting up is, I learned stuff years ago and got some of the skills that I had, and then I kind of lost it for a long time. And when I started back into it, I kind of made a few mistakes of, one, I made a pretty cheapy bench up against a wall, and wish I wouldn't have did that. And then I bought some tools that to this day I wish I wish I would have got a different one than I do. And maybe some of the stuff that I goofed up and some of the knowledge that Hendrik has might be able to help some of the people out there do that. And if I understand right, you, Hendrik, do quite a bit of the consulting, and I think that's a big part of why I thought of this topic in the first place. Is you help people set up shops quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, because I do, private instruction as well, it's a pretty common thing for someone to come to my shop, maybe for a course. I have people come in for a 5-day course and they've never done woodworking ever before. They're just really, really interested. A lot of them have been reading magazines for years, but never really got brave enough to start cutting some wood, So yeah, I have people who come in, I do seminars sometimes on the topic of setting up a shop, like a home workshop.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have people who privately come in and say, I want to book you for a half day or a day, sit down and talk about the space where I can set up a shop. Sometimes it's a basement or a garage. Other times they're actually planning to build something and they want advice on layout, what machines to buy. And then some of them even hire me to go to their shops and set up equipment for them, like, help set up their table saw, set up the riving knife, set up, jointer beds, make sure they're coplanar and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I've done that kind of work, anywhere from, I've got students that have shops the size of a small bedroom in a basement with a ceiling too low for anyone over 5 feet tall. and then I've got students who have, a commercial shop or semi-professional shop, 3,000 square feet or 4,000,
Mm-hmm.
So, and everything in between, everything from the guy with the little portable table saw to the person with a $30,000 Felder, big sliding table saw, combination machine, all that kind of stuff. So
that'd be nice to have.
So I've seen a pretty broad range of different equipment, different price points, in terms of equipment, different amounts of space and ceiling height and all that stuff. So So I have a fair bit of knowledge in that area, helping people start out.
Cool. So if somebody came to you and said, I want to start up a shop.
Yeah.
Or actually, if they say, I want to start into woodworking and I have, what's a preferred space, I guess you'd say? I mean, is there don't go smaller than if you can, or do you just work with the space you have, or?
Well, I guess, yeah, it depends on the person's budget a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody lives out in a rural area and they can easily build a small outbuilding or attach something to their garage or something like that and do it, reasonably priced, then that's an option.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say most total beginners are probably looking at working in an existing garage or basement. And if they live somewhere up here where it's cold, then heating is a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, being in the basement's probably the simplest in the sense you already have your heat. You might already have air conditioning in your home, which is already in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
The downside is the dust and the noise, which is a big issue too. So you have all these different things like, do you have a family? Do you have a wife and kids, or husband and kids in the house? And, I even tell people, if you're going to put a shop in the basement, let's say they have a totally unfinished basement, it can go almost anywhere. Always think about what room is above the shop, because I'd rather have a shop under, let's say, a spare bedroom, like a guest room, rather than underneath the kitchen, let's say, where people hang out all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if they like to eat like me.
Yeah.
Spend half your life in there.
Yeah, like mine is a basement shop, and I started as a garage shop, and the biggest problem with my garage shop in Wisconsin was, 2 months out of the year it was so cold, even with 2 bullet heaters, I could hardly keep it heated.
Right.
And 2 months out of the year it was so humid I didn't even want to move in there.
yeah, and then you get rust problems too sometimes.
Yeah, and once I moved it into the basement, I have it underneath, like you said, one room is upstairs is a office / spare bedroom, and the other room is my daughter's bedroom, but she never likes to go to bed anyway. So
yeah.
So it works out good that way. Like, if it was on the other end of the house, it would probably cause a problem, because every time I start a table saw, they wouldn't be able to hear the TV.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Then you'd hear them banging on the floor upstairs.
Oh, yeah.
You need to quiet down. Yeah. But on the one hand, when you're starting in the craft, it's kind of overwhelming, because you got the space to worry about. You probably need electrical work done. You might need some heating done. You have no tools. You have no equipment. You have no tooling like rotor bits and blades and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were to just write out a list of everything I think would be nice to have and add up what it would cost you, it would scare you, and you'd say, forget it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll just go play soccer or something else. But I think it's important to, first of all, focus on what you think you might want to build, because if you're going to build some small things like jewelry boxes and gifts and things like that, then you can do it on a smaller budget and grow into it, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that really bothers me is when someone comes to my shop for a course and they tell me all the machines they just bought like 3 months ago, asking me for advice when they've already bought them. And when they tell me what they bought, I'm saying, well, that's not really suitable, and that one I think you're going to outgrow in about a year. And, I really think people should do lots of research, get some advice. It could be from a professional like me, or it could just be people online and blogging and all that. Mm-hmm. But get real advice, solid advice from people who use these machines, not necessarily from vendors, because obviously they want you to buy everything.
Everything they have is exactly what you need.
Exactly. So, but the main thing is, if you can take a course somewhere, even if it's a night class, a college course or whatever, it's actually nice to at least use some of the machines a bit before you even commit to what model or brand or whatever you're going to buy. Mm-hmm. It's kind of odd to me when people shell out $10,000 buying a bunch of tools, then they come in and take their first course ever with me, and then realize they bought the wrong jointer and the table saw's probably going to be too small, and it's too late, Mm-hmm. So, basically do as much research as you can, and if you can take some kind of a course somewhere, even if it's just a little night class somewhere or whatever, I think you just have so much more insight into what you should have by using it first,
Yeah, a little bit of exposure to some of the tools, and I agree with you completely, because I went and I picked up a cheapie. I'm not even going to mention the name, but it just a real cheap router and a real cheap, and I guess you call it a tabletop router table. Mm-hmm. And
little miniature one with aluminum table. With
one of them. And
I know the type.
And I ended up giving it to my father, and because he does a lot smaller projects than I do, it works fine for him. It does everything he needs it to do. But because I do small and big stuff, I was so unhappy with it. And
Uh-huh.
it was one of them where I'm like, okay, I wasted this money. Now I have, I bought the top. I got the big, 3.5 horse Porter cable underneath my router table, and
Yeah.
I'm really happy with that thing.
Yeah.
And if I would have bought that in the first place, I would have saved myself a lot of money.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It's always a balancing act because some people come in my shop and they see my 20-inch planer and they say, well, do I need to buy that? And I say, well, as a beginner, I'd say no. I think you can get away with a really good quality, uh, lunchbox planer, like a DeWalt or
Hmm.
something like that. They're really good machines. Um, but on the other hand, just because I'm saying you don't have to spend top dollar doesn't mean you should buy junk or
Yeah.
really, really low end stuff that you're going to regret in 3 or 4 months.
Hmm.
You'll never get even half your money back trying to sell some kind of low name, low end brand that
Hmm.
everyone kind of knows is junk.
Yeah.
So that next thing you know, you get this yard sale and you're lucky to get 20% of your money back, and it's a massive waste.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So yeah,
I did that with a router table. I did that with table saw, and I did that with a miner saw when I first started up.
right. Yeah, I get students who come in and they don't really know what kind of table saw to buy. I consider it one of my most important machines
Hmm.
for what I do, and they run out and buy, like a portable thing, like one of these things with the plastic body
Hmm.
that you basically just put on a bench or something, and the whole thing weighs like 40 pounds.
Yep.
It doesn't weigh much more than a large router. and
Had one.
yeah, and I mean, that kind of machine is okay to do a few light duty cuts and cross cuts and miters, if you're doing some on-site carpentry somewhere.
Hmm.
But then they tell me, well, they want to build, heavy duty workbench like mine, made of 8-quarter beech or something. And I mean, good luck cutting that stuff on a saw like that. I mean, the thing is basically like a circular saw turned upside down,
Yeah,
right?
well, one piece of wood weighs more than some.
Exactly. Actually, I even had one student once complain to me that his table saw kept turning over upside down while he was cutting because it was so light, and I think it was just sitting on like a workmate or something.
Hmm.
And he's trying to cut like a 10-foot long, 2.5-inch thick piece of maple, 8 inches wide. The thing weighs 80 pounds. and next thing you know, the table saw's tipping over.
Yeah,
So that's never good.
I was in a very similar situation where I was setting up a couple of roller stands on one of those older saws. And I was sitting there with a, fairly large piece of plywood with a couple roller stands, and I'm like, okay, I'm making sure this is here and I'm not in front of it. And I looked at it and I'm like, this is just stupid. I am not going to do this. I set it down, ended up putting a piece of the pink foam insulation and using the handheld circle saw
Yeah.
instead because it was
Okay.
safer than trying to put it through that.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm a firm believer that you should buy what you actually need, not like, I have students on both ends of the spectrum. I have students who have tight budgets and, they want advice on the minimum to buy.
Hmm.
And then I have students who are quite wealthy and they've got their eyes on this $20,000 combination machine.
Mm.
And, nothing wrong with that if you got the money, but they're asking me like, do I need to buy that? And I say, no, you clearly don't need that. And they say, well, they ask me again a week later, are you sure I don't need it? I just know they want to buy it.
Yeah.
I finally just break down and say, look, you don't need it, but you clearly really want it and you clearly have the money, so why don't you? Like, just have fun.
Hmm.
If that's the kind of budget you have. But I hate for a beginner that doesn't have that kind of budget to look in the magazines and stuff and say, oh God, if I don't have a $4,000 table saw, I can't do woodworking. I mean, that's nonsense. Then you see people in magazines that are building incredible works of art, and then they tell you, oh, I live in Brazil. I'm actually not very wealthy, and I do woodworking in a closet.
Hmm.
And I have virtually no tools, like a hand saw,
Yeah.
a spoke shave, this kind of thing.
Hmm.
And every once in a while, you got to realize you can do amazing work with very little if you really have the desire.
Hmm.
And you got to find the right balance between those two. So
Yeah, and there's a lot of times that, I mean, I'm not just a woodworker. I'm a tool collector. I love tools.
Right. Right.
It's one of the guy things. The rah rah rah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I've had a lot of students like that over the years, and I can't. If someone has the money for it, I can't look down on that approach if that's what's giving them fun. But
hmm
there does come a point where 7, 8 years later, they got this amazing shop and they haven't built anything yet.
yeah, that's the part.
Like there's a point where I start saying, you know what, you need to like actually do something in here. And their wife, the wife is certainly saying the same thing. Like, where's that bed you promised me, and where's that sofa table you said you were going to build? You dropped 30 grand on this stuff and you haven't built anything yet.
hmm
So whatever. As long as you're having fun and you can afford it, then great. But for people who don't have a big budget, they can still start somewhere and just build it up slowly over time, right?
hmm
I would rather that you wait until you can afford a tool that's not top notch maybe, but at least middle of the road, rather than just go out and buy a whole bunch of low end junk that you will regret.
Yeah, and
That's the wrong approach.
and I learned by that at first I picked up, well, that one's cheap. It's the same thing, right? Well,
Yeah.
not always. And one person that said something to me that made the most sense was, when you're going to buy a tool, if you really need or want that tool for some reason, whatever it is, buy the best one that you can afford.
Yeah.
And it always made sense to me from then, because I'm like, yeah, okay, if I waited one more month, I'll be able to afford that next one, and it isn't that important to get it done right now.
Right. Right. Yeah, I remember when I used to have a contractor saw, like a cast iron top
hmm
with the stamped steel wings. Back then cast iron wings weren't even that common.
Yeah.
And but it was still a 300-pound saw, 1.5 horsepower. It could still cut through 3-inch thick maple, except you had to push a little slower.
hmm
And I remember when I upgraded from that to a unisaw, is what I have now, 3 horsepower.
hmm
I remember when I did that, a lot of my students said, "Oh, I guess you bought the unisaw because you needed it." And I said, "You know what? I don't even technically need it, because I'm not the kind of shop that's like a production shop where you might be ripping these giant maple boards 7 hours a day. It's not like that.
Yeah.
I could still today do everything I do on my unisaw on a smaller contractor saw, as long as it's got a reasonably powerful motor and a good fence, and it still has to be, a pretty robust thing. It can't be some portable thing, lightweight kind of thing. But yeah, you got to strike the right balance. And I told everyone I bought this unisaw because I've been eyeing it for a while, and I just wanted it. Like, I just wanted to treat myself to that. And I am a business. I do a lot of work on the machine, so it's certainly more necessary for me than someone who does it 3 or 4 hours a week. But yeah, you got to find the right balance, and don't overbuy, but don't buy junk either.
So if somebody came to you and said, I want to do power tool woodworking, and I want to make not really big furniture, but furniture like end tables, chairs, smaller, I guess the smaller end of the furniture stuff. And what would you say are some of the essential power tools that would help them?
Well, the one thing I feel really strongly about is that people need to have a jointer and planer, even if it's a small 6-inch joiner and a small portable planer. I feel they're very important, because anytime you buy pre-milled stock in the store, it's not even close to flat. It's twisted and curved, and it's nothing but frustration. Like, it's hard for me to work with material that's worked like that, and I've been doing this a long time.
Yeah.
For someone who's a beginner, they're going to be pulling their hair out. They're going to be looking at the project that didn't turn out so well and just feeling bad, and that's not going to help you want to continue in the craft. So I'm because I do fairly precise work. I see how much accuracy I can get out of my jointer, and I've worked with other students on smaller jointers that, when well tuned, can also do amazing work. So to me, that's critical. Joiner and planer, even if they're small,
Mm-hmm.
but not junk, not really cheap brands and really low quality either. But
Yeah.
it can be smaller,
Mm-hmm.
And then the other biggie for me, right in the middle of my shop, is my table saw.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people say they like to use the bandsaw for a lot of work, and I love my bandsaw too, but the bandsaw can't do dados and rabbits in the same way. It can't do. I mean, I have a Laguna bandsaw. It's very good.
Mm-hmm.
It has a resaw king blade, which is excellent.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't care how good your blade is or how good your bandsaw is, the cut is never as precise and smooth as a table saw, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I still feel like for perfect crosscuts, it's the table saw. I can get perfect miters on my table saw. I can do, like I said, all kinds of joinery. I mean, bandsaws can do joinery too, but not always at the level I expect,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I can do all my heavy duty ripping, and there's so many things a table saw can do. I just can't imagine working without it. I think a lot of people who use bandsaws a lot compared to table saws are afraid of the table saw too.
Mm.
Have had kickbacks, maybe don't fully understand why it's happening, but they just kind of get scared of it, and they realize they never get kickbacks on their bandsaw, so that's why they use it a lot. But for me, a table saw is more accurate, and it actually costs less to run a table saw to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I got a carbide blade on there that costs maybe $12 to $15 to sharpen and lasts for hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of linear feet of cutting.
Mm-hmm.
On a bandsaw, I put on a $20 blade or a $30 blade, and that thing is shot after a few resaws.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they really don't last long unless you go into carbide, and then the price is huge for a beginner. It's probably not going to happen. So, in terms of the actual price per linear foot sort of thing, or price per cut, table saw totally beats out the bandsaw for low cost and gives a great result too.
Cool. I never thought of it that way. I mean, I've got the center of my shop basically revolves around my table saw and my workbench, and on the other end of my workbench is a Laguna bandsaw too, and I love it, and I do a lot of different things on it, but I guess I don't. I always turn to the table saw too. That's my go-to machine all the time. So.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the bandsaw is a curve cutting tool and a resaw tool, because I can't do real, big resaws on a table saw.
Mm-hmm.
Or you might be doing laminations, like bent lamination work, and the bandsaw is less wasteful. So
yeah,
you don't want to use a table saw even if it'll work because of the waste. But
yeah, an eighth inch out of every cut. Yeah.
Yeah, but what I find for most beginners starting out, I find that they're not going to get into bent lamination work. They're not going to do resawing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also they're going to want some curves, but usually on the flat plane. Like, in other words, not like a bent lamination, but more like just cutting an oval or a circle or a little rounded corner.
Oh, sure.
And that's easily done with a good quality jigsaw.
Yep.
So I often say, I love my bandsaw, but I got away with using just a jigsaw for many, many years as a hobbyist. There's lots of problems with the jigsaw blade wandering. There are problems, but between jigsaws and using templates and routers,
Mm-hmm.
I can do a ton without a bandsaw for now. And then you can buy the bandsaw later after you have some of the other core equipment that I think is more important.
Yeah.
Start. Yeah, so for me, it's table saw, joiner, planer are key.
Mm-hmm.
For me, a drill press is very important. I'm kind of surprised when I meet people who don't have one, because they're not expensive.
Oh, I love mine.
Even a small benchtop one, like not a tiny one, but a kind of a heavy benchtop version would be fine for a lot of beginners.
Mm-hmm.
But even a floor model, I mean, you can get something pretty good for $400 or $500, and it'll last you 25, 30 years. So
yeah,
it's not expensive.
I've got one that I guess you'd call like a mid. It's not a full floor model, but it's the biggest bench model you can get, and I am
Okay.
so happy I have that thing. I've done so many different things with it, not just drilling either.
Yeah. Like some people buy oscillating spindle sanders. I usually say, well, unless you're doing tons of that work, you can easily use a drum sander on a drill press.
Mhm.
You can make up a little jig, where you have like a table with a hole in it, stick it in there, and you can do that. You can do, any kind of doweling or just general hole drilling comes up constantly. And
Mhm.
if you did all your hole drilling with a freehand drill, I mean, it's just total frustration because nothing's ever perfectly straight.
Yeah, and
So,
I made a little extra table for on top of mine because mine came with the little round, metal thing that everybody does, and I made a table for it with a fence, and I make a couple little jigs, and it's easier to get your holes spaced right when you're making several things. It's
right.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's crucial. And then, you mentioned a workbench. I mean, to me, a workbench is, almost more important than the machines in the shop.
Yeah.
I mean, again, there's lots of people who build more basic workbenches where they just put a metal worker's vise on it and they glue 3 or 4 layers of MDF together. I have nothing against that for a beginner,
Mhm.
because all you need is a nice flat surface with a vise of some kind, and you're in business. I mean, once somebody's more skilled, then I recommend they build a more traditional woodworker's vise like mine.
Mhm.
Not only because it's amazing to have, but it's also a great project to hone your skills too. Like it's a pretty demanding project compared to building, a little end table or something. With mortise and tenon joinery and all the dog holes and the tool well and the vices, especially like a tail vise is fairly complex to make. So to me, that's a crucial thing. But in the beginning, a woodworker has so many things they need to set up.
Yeah.
And spend their money on. I'm not sure they should tackle a workbench right away. They should probably cobble together something basic first, as long as it's not too basic, and maybe that'll last them the first 2 or 3 years, and then they'll build a more serious bench after when they have the skills.
And I'm going on. I have the extremely basic that's still in the garage up against the wall that I'm not happy with, and then I have the mid one, where the base is actually pretty complex. It's got mortise and tenon real nice, but it's just got 2 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood on top, glued together and screwed in from underneath, and it works great. But at some point, this top is going to get replaced.
Yeah. Well, you could always slap another piece of MDF over top.
Yeah.
Anytime,
That was what when I
year.
originally built it. I thought, well, if I screw it up or spill something on it or make it all, I can just flip it over, right?
Yeah. Like for example, my router table in my shop, that's another important piece of equipment. But mine is a homemade table, homemade fence and everything.
Mhm.
I've been to people's shops that have very expensive router tables, and their table can't do anything mine can.
Mhm.
And sometimes their router tables are so complex that some of the gizmos the manufacturer designed for you don't actually work properly. And I sort of take them through and show them, well, you thought your fence was straight, but it's not because it's a split fence, and the aluminum extrusion has a mistake in it.
Mhm.
And I find all these little flaws, and I get kind of mad because they're like, I spent $1,200 on this router table.
Yeah.
How could it have those flaws? And I'm like, well, because the manufacturer tried to give you too many bells and whistles for that price. And sometimes all you need is a flat table and a sturdy fence, and it doesn't have to be that fancy. It just has to be good, and flat and strong. So I really encourage a lot of beginners to maybe hone some of their basic skills, building themselves a router table, building themselves a crosscut sled, building, some jigs they're going to need anyway. And then, not tackle something quite as complex as a traditional workbench for a while. Wait till you got a little more experience, a few simple pieces of furniture under your belt before you tackle something that big.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but I mean, we do have to build so many things around the shop, like router tables, jigs, and fixtures, and you need a lumber rack of some kind, which you might make yourself out of wood too, which is always fun because that's simple and you can just use screws and lag screws and stuff. So yeah, maybe hone some of your basic skills on the workshop stuff that doesn't have to be perfect, and then work your way up through the furniture after.
Yeah, because when you're building it for the shop, you're the only one that's going to see it.
Yeah, yeah. Anything else goes to the mother-in-law, right?
There you go.
But I mean, and then the other question I get a lot is, people come into my shop, they see all the equipment, and then they see all the hand planes and the chisels and that, and they're kind of wondering, do I need to buy 20 hand planes or what do I need? And I personally feel very strongly that people should start with the machinery, not the hand tools. Not because the hand tools aren't very important to me, they are. But hand tools have such a steep learning curve that if you start with them and you actually plan to work rough lumber all by hand,
Oof.
I'm pretty sure it won't be long before you say, this isn't for me, and you just walk away. Because that's just too hard, even for an experienced person.
Unless it's going to be also your exercise program and your hobby.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a lot of fun when you're watching someone else do it. But when you're doing it, I mean, I do hand planing that really is fun, like really fine detail work, and it's a total joy, especially with a nice, nicely tuned plane, and it's razor sharp. But for the average hobbyist going out to buy a cheap plane, they don't even know how to tune it. They have no idea how to sharpen yet. And they're just hacking away at this tabletop they built for hours, like sweating up a storm. There's not much fun in that.
Yeah, my first El Cheapo one that now sits in a box outside, and I don't really care what happens to it. I've now all of mine are all of my planes are very old, and I've refurbished most of them, and I love them. But that first one that I got for the Harbor Freight Special, that you're like, and now I look at it going, you can't even tune this thing. This is awful.
It works better if you drive over it with a pickup truck, right?
It's a nice weight to keep papers down when I'm cutting stuff out the garage.
Yeah. But like when I'm teaching someone a course, for example, I have a 5-day course where someone comes in and we build a small little cherry side table. And probably, I don't know, at least 90% of the work is by machine. But then we use a hand plane to hand plane the top flat on both sides. Even though I have a planer wide enough to plane it, I say, no, you're going to learn how to do this by hand. But even then, I'm giving them a plane I've already tuned and already sharpened perfectly. And I'm just saying, here, let me teach you how to use it. Because they're only here 5 days. There's only so much time. And then I say to them, if you want to come back for another course later, or even just a short thing, like a day or two, then we can get into sharpening and hand plane tune-up and all the rest of it. But it's way too much for someone to be able to acquire those skills all at one time. It's too much. So my view is start with machines, and even if the projects aren't perfect because you needed a hand tool and didn't know how, at least you're actually building stuff, And usually the woodworker is the most critical of their own work. Like, you think you did an awful job on this, but your wife and your friends and everyone thinks it's amazing,
Yeah.
Well, you actually need that kind of positive feedback from your family and friends in order to want to continue in the craft. Like, you need that. You need that pat on the back all the time, which is the importance of, actually doing woodworking, not just collecting tools and staring at your shop, So I always say, start with the machines, get some actual projects done, get that positive feedback, which makes you feel great. And then the interest in the hand tools and the money for it will come, a bit later. But if you start with just hand tools with no machines yet, I think it's just so frustrating. You'll just walk from the craft faster than you think, You'll just give up at some point. So I kind of like doing it the other way around, because I can teach someone how to use a jointer and a planer and a table saw, quite well within a couple days. It doesn't mean you're an expert. You still got tons of learning to do yourself later.
Sure.
But you still have a very good grounding in how to use these machines safely and do some really accurate work. Whereas a hand plane, I could teach someone for 2 days straight, and they can still, call me a month later and say, I kind of don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Because the learning curve is so steep. You can't possibly learn that fine of a skill in a couple of days. It's kind of like trying to learn how to swing a golf club. Like, in theory, it sounds simple, but people have been doing it for 10 years and still have to take more lessons. You know what I mean?
Yeah, every time I try, it always hooks to the left. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, with hand tools, you're talking about such subtle things, including the setup and the sharpening and everything. Whereas with a table saw, we'll set up the fence and we'll put the right blade in and give you some training on safety and everything, and you can get into some actual work being done in a much shorter amount of time and get that feedback.
Yeah, I can get people that instant feedback to, hey, I'm making something, and
exactly.
And regardless, I guess the way I'm looking at it is, you start in there and you can have results and you can do those things, and the hand tools are going to come in time because that fine, like you were saying, the little bits of fine adjustment and different things. I mean, that stuff hand tools are just so amazing at.
Oh yeah, and it's always funny when I have a student in for a course, and they're a total beginner, never even touched a table saw before, and on the first day of the course, they're totally overwhelmed. I mean, there's just so much information, so much new stuff to swallow, and then as we work throughout the week, they start getting an appreciation for what 1/1000th of an inch means. Like I start telling them, like, this is off about 3 thou. I'm not happy. This has to be better. This is what we need to do. Whether it's machine or hand tool, I mean, you can get very precise, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because then on like Friday afternoon, they'll do something and they'll say, how's this? And I'll say, actually, that's pretty good. And they'll say, yeah, but isn't it like off like a thou or so? Because I can feel a little bump here. And I always look at them and I say, you know what? On Monday morning when you walked in, you wouldn't have even felt 1 thou. But 5 days later, here you're complaining to me about 1 thou error. It's amazing to see how that all develops. Yeah, because the more you do, the more demanding you get of your own work and what good work is. So that's the beauty of it. You're never a total expert in anything.
Yeah, and there's so many different things when it comes to woodworking. I think you and I talked about it before. There's parts that I've never even thought of trying that some people are complete experts on, and there's so much to it that people can learn, and it's such a rewarding thing to do too.
Yeah, and it's such a big field. You really can't swallow the whole thing. I mean, even in your whole lifetime, you'll never do all of it. So I kind of, in my mind, sort of compartmentalize different parts of woodworking as being specialties, like turning, marquetry, carving. Like, to me, those are all subsets where you could spend your whole life on just one of those areas if you want.
Yeah.
I personally sort of train people to start with sort of what you might call cabinet making, I guess. Working with solid wood, sometimes with plywood too, but using table saws, joiners, planers, routers, sanding machines, bandsaw, drill press, all that stuff. And then I lead them into some hand tools as well. But to me, the turning and marquetry and all that are all kind of specialized. And, I think you should get more of a grounding in the sort of general area first. And then, I'm not a turner, so you got to go find yourself an expert turner to teach you that. You know what I mean? I don't even turn.
Yeah.
So I think it makes more sense to start with the general stuff, but learn how to do it in a very accurate way. And then sort of, once you get quite good at that area, then you're like, okay, I'm really interested in marquetry because I saw that amazing stuff at that woodworking show. And then you find out there's a marquetry club or guild or something in your area, and maybe you join with them and you start learning that area. And you might only do it a couple of years and say, okay, that was fun. I learned a ton, but I'm kind of getting fed up with that. I want to learn turning now. But I think a lot of beginners want to focus, like they're reading woodworking magazines and they're seeing all of these different things, and they want to tackle all of them at once, and it's way too much. You just can't do that, or you end up just not learning anything because there's too much to take on at once,
Yeah. Well, and like the club in Green Bay that I'm in, there's some people that are just carvers and that's all they do, and there's some people that are just turners and that's all they do, and there's some that are the jack of all trades. They do a little of everything, and each one of them has their own unique way of doing something. And every time I talk to those guys, it's, you find one little thing, you're like, hey, maybe if I tried that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the decision about your workshop too. Like if someone says, I'm really interested in scroll work, or I'm really interested in marquetry and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
then someone can do something like that in a very confined space.
Oh, yeah.
And carving too. So, if you're in a limited space, maybe even live in a condo or an apartment or something, and you don't really have space for a real heavy duty shop,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you have a friend that has a shop who can just cut carving blanks for you once in a while, and you can do this stuff, in your kitchen or whatever,
Yeah.
wherever you have to.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for someone who wants to build furniture, you need more equipment. That doesn't mean you need a couple thousand square feet, but it means you do need more space. You might be getting into a lot of mobile bases, having to roll machines around because of lack of space.
Mm-hmm.
And, for me, that would be frustrating having to do that on a daily basis as a professional.
Yeah.
But for a hobbyist who's doing it half a day per week, no big deal. There's no rush. I can roll this machine here and bring the next one in. Not the end of the world. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so you can still do it in a small space, but it can't be tiny.
Yeah, when I started out, I had a lot of mobile bases on my stuff out in the garage because the only thing that my wife said was, I don't care what you do as long as she can still park the car in there.
Right.
Well, after a while, it was, okay, she can park the car in there, but that whole other half was constantly set up, and I couldn't park the car in there anymore. So I'm like, okay, I got to move this because I want to park my car inside, too.
I mean, your wife wasn't cleaning the snow off your car?
Yeah, no, that sucked, too. And now that I got a new truck recently, I'm like, that ain't sitting outside. There ain't no way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like also with dust collection, right? Like a lot of beginners will buy a small little, single stage collector, and they just roll it over to the machine, hook up the hose, and then, 5 minutes later they need to use a jointer, they roll it over again. And, I couldn't live that way, because I'll jump from machine to machine 100 times in one day. I can't do that. But for a beginner, again, maybe you hook it up to the table saw, you use it for an hour, then you switch to the joiner, use it for an hour, and maybe you're done now for the day, So those kinds of temporary kinds of things are fine for someone doing it, a handful of hours a week. If someone retires from their job and now they're going to woodwork 20 hours a week, then they're probably going to go into something a little more permanent in terms of maybe less mobile bases and more space and a bigger dust collector with hard piping. And then, a professional is going to go another level still. Some people have automatic blast gates and everything else, and I don't have automatic gates, but I have a cyclone and I've got hard piping, and it's expensive to do, but a beginner doesn't need that.
Yeah, well, I've got to the point where the table saw is always hooked to the dust collector, and it's big enough that I could do hard piping, but I'm going to build a separate room next to this room that it will be in, and that's going to be soundproofed more. So at that point, I'll do the hard piping, but for now, I got to switch the hose from tool to tool, except the table saw.
Yeah, well, I mean, if your table saw is the one you use the most, then that's the wise way to do it.
That's hooked up all the time.
Yeah, that's good. But I mean, it's so overwhelming, Like the other thing I find most people are surprised at, they come in my shop and they look around. I've got some students that are fairly well off, and they look around my shop and say, I could buy every piece of equipment in your shop. Like they're always surprised that I don't have, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. They somehow think it's going to be this massive industrial shop. And I say, no, you can buy all this equipment I have, and it's it's going to cost you money, but it's not an outrageous amount.
Mm-hmm.
But then I say to them, well, how much value do you think my shop has in total outside of the machines? And they assume that the machines are the majority. Not even close. My machines are worth maybe, 1/7 of the value of everything in my shop in total.
Yeah.
And that's because of things like router bits, hand plane blades, clamps, chisels. That's where all the money is.
Mm-hmm.
So people forget that just getting the joiner, the planer, the table saw, that kind of stuff is only a fraction of what you need in time, but you can't possibly afford it all at once, so we need to prioritize.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I always suggest, buy the tools as they're required for a specific project.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go out and buy some crazy cheap rotor bit set where you get 200 rotor bits, but they're all total junk.
Yep.
Buy 3 or 4 really good quality ones, and buy the ones that you will actually use, like chamfer bits, straight bits, rabbit bits, roundovers, all the common stuff. And then when the next project requires a new profile, you go buy one good quality bit for that new project, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And same with clamps. You buy 6 clamps, and then the next project you need 8, you go buy 2 more. If you were to buy every clamp in my shop, you'd be spending thousands just on clamps. So that doesn't make any sense for a beginner.
Yeah, and no matter how many you seem to have, for some reason I'm always one short.
Oh yeah. I mean, I still have times where almost every clamp in my shop is used up at one point, and you kind of like, oh gee, I should buy some more. But then I'm like, well, it's the end of the day anyway. I'll come back in the morning, I'll unclamp half this stuff, and I'll go glue more stuff in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Stage it out. But as a beginner, everything's expensive, and there's a lot of stuff you need. So don't go crazy buying, 60 clamps all at once and 40 rotor bits when you could have gotten away with 8 clamps and 4 bits. And then over the years, you will have a very big collection of these things eventually, but not all at one time.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us that when we started out made the mistake of, oh look, it's the box of they seem to be blue or yellow, and they have a ton, like you said, I think around 200 router bits, and you use them, and they're just complete crap.
Well, I remember one time I was at a woodworking show here nearby, local, and one of my students came to, I was presenting seminars at the show, and he came up to me and said, "Did you see that deal on those router bits over there?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Oh, they have these router bits. It's like I forget what it was, something like $120 for 66 router bits in a nice aluminum case, right? Even the case should be at least $50." and I'm looking at, first of all, I'm calculating, okay, that's less than $2 per bit. So what kind of a bit can you make for $2? And secondly, I go to the booth later, and I'm looking at them, and there's no brand name on the bits anywhere. Not even a numbered company, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what kind of company makes stuff and doesn't put their brand on it? Like, clearly this is like the lowest end possible. Like they don't want to be sued when someone gets hurt, basically.
Yeah, it wasn't me.
Yeah, so I said to the student, there's no way I would ever buy bits that cost less than $2 each, unless it's a bankruptcy sale or something.
Yeah.
And he said, well, you know what, to be honest, I bought it already because I was just too tempted and I had to have it. I said, fine, whatever, good luck kind of thing. And then he emails me a few days later and says, the first 2 bits I used already broke in half, ricocheted across the room. I said, I told you not to buy them, like you're going to kill yourself. But, you just see that big set and you just have to have it because the price is so good. And,
yeah.
You just can't put yourself in danger like that. So, yeah, well, you don't, anytime the price is too good to be true, there's something wrong there.
Yeah, it probably is too good to be true.
Yep.
Well, I suppose I should probably get going on some of this stuff, but just to kind of recap quick, I guess the space isn't as important in most cases as what you're going to be doing in the space.
Yeah.
The same thing with use the space that you have. You can usually make something work one way or another. And then joiner, planer, table saw, drill press, and some type of a router setup are kind of a good spot to start for somebody.
Yeah, router table, and then some form of workbench, even if it's fairly basic. And yeah, and then when you get into some hand tools, you're going to get into a grinder. And I would personally add the bandsaw after you've done about as much as you can with a good jigsaw and template routing kind of work. I would wait a little while and bring the bandsaw in later when you need more accuracy, or you need to cut perfect circles, or you need to resaw. And and then start funneling your money into the actual tooling, for the machines, like the blades and the bits and the clamps and all that stuff. That's how I would.
And the wood.
Yeah, you got to buy some wood at some point.
Yeah.
Like if you build a workbench and you fail, then you got some wood there already to use up.
Well, I guess one other thing I have a question on is, now I don't use mine for anything except just breaking down stock. But what about like either a sliding or tilting, like a miter saw? What do you think of one of them?
I don't have one.
You don't have one?
No, I don't even have one.
Mm-hmm.
And people are always walking in my shop going, "Where's the miter saw?" I'll tell you why I don't have one. If I was an on-site carpenter,
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to have one. Right? I'd have to have something I can throw in my pickup truck, and I can carry it into someone's house, and I can cut beautiful miters and everything. No problem.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about a miter saw is generally you need about 8 feet of space on either side of it.
Mm-hmm.
Sliding compound miter saws take up tons of space behind them too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now there are models that take less space. I mean, I've seen some Bosch models and stuff that have like a different design that uses less space.
Oh yeah, I've seen them.
But the point is, you might be using up close to 20 linear feet of space along a wall.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's tremendous amount of real estate to use up in your shop for a machine that you're only going to use for some miters and probably mostly just breaking down rough stock.
Yeah.
You pull a big rough board out of your rack, you use a miter saw to cut it in half, then you go to your table saw and do all the accurate stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I personally either cut the rough board on the table saw, because I can cross cut, even something 9 feet long in half, no problem on the table saw.
Mm-hmm.
Or I grab a circular saw, I grab a jigsaw with oscillating action, which can be way faster than you think.
Mm-hmm.
And, my thought process is, well, if I'm only using the miter saw to cut this rough board in half, and then I'm going to the table saw to do the fine work, then can I really give up that much real estate for that miter saw?
Yeah, and
now the other thing I've discovered is very few miter saws can do absolutely perfect miters.
I agree.
You know what I mean? Like, usually you have a 10-inch diameter, a 12-inch diameter blade, and as you're coming through the stock, the blade's flexing to the side, and you got a little play in the arm too, coming down.
Mm-hmm.
I can get very, very, very accurate miters on my table saw that I can't get on most miter saws.
Yeah.
If you're doing some rough carpentry, the miter's good enough. And definitely if you're cutting MDF trim and you're painting it white, then you don't care. You just caulk the crack in.
Yep.
Paint right over it.
Yep.
but for me to give up that much real estate when my table saw actually cuts miters more accurately, it makes no sense to me,
Yeah, and that's a big reason I'm thinking of moving the miter saw and the stand that it's on back out into the garage, because I break stock down with it down here, and that's all I really use it for.
Yeah.
And I have to take it to, I think we've spoken before, my wife owns and runs, or we own and she runs 2 group homes. Yeah. And, things you have to fix there and different things. I use it there more than I do for anything productive in the shop. Yeah. And I'm like, that's taking up an awful lot of room, and I could move my router table over, and I could do this.
I mean, I think if I was, let's say I was building my own home, or building a new house, or building a cottage, and I knew I had to run hundreds of linear feet of molding around the house, like baseboard trim and crown molding, I would buy a miter saw just for that job, no doubt.
Oh, yeah.
I'd have it sitting there on the living room floor, chopping all these miters all the time.
Yeah.
But for a shop like mine making furniture, I don't do, high production level. I really can't justify that amount of space to do breakdown work,
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of people walk in my shop and they're just shocked, like, where's that miter saw? I don't have one. They look at me like I'm an alien. But doing furniture work.
Yeah.
What's the longest piece of wood I'm ever going to cut a miter on? Probably 8 feet. Most of the time it's 5 feet and under.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not building like 30-foot long boardroom tables or something. So it really isn't limiting for me to cut miters on the table saw.
Yeah. Yeah, and my table saw, I mean, you cut the miter, and because I've got a decent blade and it's a nice flat top and everything. I mean, I know that thing's at 90, where I'm cutting it, and I know that, it's 45 or whatever angle I wanted to cut. I know it's there.
Yeah.
The miter saw that I have that's actually more accurate than the power one is I have an old-time Diston saw with, I don't even remember what the brand is, but it's, it's a hand miter saw. I mean, that one, if I put it in there, I know that's 45 too.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I notice a lot of people, like I go to someone else's shop and they've got a miter saw, and I say, well, we need to cross cut this board exactly this length, and I'm ready to do it on their table saw, with a sled or sliding table or whatever they have. And they're like, well, why don't I just cut that on the miter saw? And I say, well, okay, go ahead, go cut it. And they bring it back. I look at it. It's got a burn mark on the end. It's got like a wave to it, like the head kind of drifted.
Yep.
And then I put a square on, and it's not quite right. So then we go tinker with the miter saw for like an hour, trying to set up the fence perfectly and everything.
Yep.
And it's sort of random. Like if you do 10 cuts, 7 work out perfectly, and the last 3 something went wrong, but we don't know what.
Mhm.
Just blade flex and stuff. And I can get like just totally consistent cuts off the table saw every single time, as long as I always clamp it to the miter gauge or the sled or whatever.
Mhm.
They're dead on, and I can get amazing quality blades. And I don't think the miter saw is all people think they're cracked up to be. So,
cool.
anyways, for me, that's sort of a portable tool. People need for on-site work, on-site carpentry kind of thing.
Yeah.
But for furniture work right here in my shop, I don't really have a big use for it.
That's a cool. Yeah, and like I said, I'm thinking of moving mine out because it seems to be in the way. Well, I guess
especially those stands. The stand takes up a lot of room too.
Oh, and I built a cabinet to put it on, so it's up a little higher, and I like where it is, and it works nice. And the cabinet actually holds quite a few things that I have in it. And if I extend it one way, the drill press table can hold up one end of a board, and if I extend it the other way, it goes out toward the door where I have space anyway. So but it's just the actual space it's taking up is the part where I'm like, I could use that.
It's probably at least 3 feet from the wall, and might be 6 or 7 feet in length total with the stand.
Yeah.
So that would easily be 2.5, 3 router tables right there.
I know, and
kind of
a
a lot of real
around
estate.
stuff.
Yeah, I've had quite a few students buy a deluxe miter saw, sliding compound miter saw with a stand, and literally a year later they said, can you help me sell this thing? Because they just realized they're not using it for anything that important.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I guess next time we're going to be talking more about setting up some stuff, but we're going to go in a little bit of a different direction. I guess more of once you get into it a little more, kind of the hand tools to look for and kind of some of the skills to go on, if I remember we talked about, right? Yeah.
Sure, we can talk a bit about, how you learn woodworking, like where you start, and maybe the kinds of projects that I think beginners should tackle, and then how you would increase the skill level with future projects in a way that makes sense. That would be good.
Yeah, it sounds good. And if anybody has any questions for Hendrik related to that, or actually anything else, feel free to either shoot an email, use a contact form on the site, or I will have the Skype name. Skype name is Ravinheart, and the Skype number will be on screen at the end of this podcast. So.
Yeah, good. And I'm also going to be at the IWF, like I said, from I think it's August 22nd to 25th. So if any of your listeners are planning to be down there and they want to, post something on your site trying to hook up or just say hi down there or whatever, go ahead and leave a message on your site, and then I'll try and hook up with them.
That sounds great.
Okay, great.
Well, hey, thanks a lot, Hendrik, and maybe next time I can get down to IWF. This year is my woodworking vacations are curbed until next year, so.
Yeah. I know the feeling. I only do the IWF every second year, and then there's a few other shows I'm like presenting in, but most of them are more local to me, so.
Well,
only do so much traveling.
Yeah, local isn't all that far from me since I'm far enough north. I might have to venture up that way sometime and say hi.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll talk to you again next month, and I'll let the cat out of the bag on the new DVD as well when we get there.
All right, sounds great. Look forward to it.
Okay, talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right.